Over the weeks and months that followed my time in New York City, Silent Light and its subject matter became quite a conversation piece. If I'm being honest, it became something of a conversational crutch. Unless I'm with people who I know won't mind talking about it, an opera would not be something that I would lead off with if you and I were meeting for the first time. It's a bit of a niche conversation starter. But given the amount of Mennonites I see on a daily basis in Winnipeg and in southern Manitoba, the opera's scandal and its nuance became something that, without fail, would elicit a pause and a thoughtful response. It was like that movie night that I hosted at my house all those months ago, minus the pizza. The show's moral conflict and the characters that inhabit them began to present themselves to me almost the minute I returned. My wife and I drove down to a wedding in Morden, Manitoba, Marika and Abrams, who you met in the first episode. We drove past countless farmhouses not dissimilar to what I imagined Johan, Esther, and their family lived in. Each house was a chance to think about what those family dynamics were like, how much more complicated they must be than a drive-by must give them credit for. I thought about my own marriage, less than a month old at that point, and the idiosyncrasies that it might present to an Orthodox worldview. The wedding in Morden was beautiful, a uniquely crafted event celebrating a unique and loving relationship. True to our rebellious Mennonite form, we danced ourselves well into the night until the stars were just as bright as the lamps that lit up the grounds. Even something as innocent as a night skyline brought me right back to Brooklyn. Not because you can enjoy the stars in one of the most light-polluted places on Earth, but for an idea of perhaps the only place where that orthodox can exist, and where it doesn't remotely matter. I'm Nolan Kehler, and from Canadian Mennonites' Menno Creative Residency, this is A Light on Silence, Performance Art and the Kerchiefed Faith. Episode 4, Spielraum. Throughout the process of preparing for Silent Light at National Sawdust and in preparing the podcast, there was one person in particular that I was dying to talk to. Miriam Toews. Not only was Miriam one of the stars of Silent Light the movie, but she has also written extensively throughout her career about grappling with the same cultural forces that I found myself wrestling with. As much as I knew that anyone would obviously jump at the chance to be a part of my podcast, I had to temper my expectations. Miriam has been hesitant to speak about these things in public over the years, to put it mildly, and I knew that talking with her about this might be a bit beyond my reach. That said, I screwed up my courage and wrote to her agents. Miriam's agents declined, politely, my request for comment, and I wasn't surprised. Miriam was one of the busiest authors in Canada at the time that I was making my requests, and honestly, it might have made for a bit of an awkward conversation. All of that aside, I did find myself wanting to talk to someone about everything I was thinking and feeling about the show. Someone who wasn't an opera person in my life, and someone who wasn't just a Mennonite. Someone who could see the full picture that I was staring at and trying my best to comprehend. In the months after New York City, I tried to find things that would explain what I was feeling about Mennonite depictions in the fine arts. While I could find ample resources about Mennonites and music when it came to music as a form of worship, it was trickier to find things that talked about Mennonites as performers, participating in something more prideful and selfish than lending one's talents to glorifying God. And then I found something. The book was called Making Believe: Questions About Mennonites and Art. It was written by Magdalene Redekop, a professor emeritus at the University of Toronto who had devoted her time to the study of Mennonites and their pursuits in the creative fields. There were studies of Miriam Toews and her work, alongside a bevy of other Mennonite writers spanning the last half-century. There was talk of Stilles Licht, the silent light movie that inspired the opera. And, most surprisingly, there were references to her own childhood, growing up outside of Altona, not even 10 minutes from my childhood home. One thing that kept appearing throughout the book was this idea. For all of the Mennonite artists that had made it big on the world stage, there is no such thing as Mennonite art. Oh, sure, there's a Mennonite sensibility to art, allowing people of all cultures and backgrounds to see our stories, our culture, and the viewpoints through which we look at and govern our lives on a broad scale, but there is not Mennonite art. Perhaps this was a way to look at silent light, minus the anxiety that I ascribed to it. This was not Mennonite art. This was a piece about Mennonites that explored themes that were universal. Grief, complex love, wondering which path is the right path. It was a sentiment that everyone involved in the production at National Sawdust had told me, but in my nervousness for my faith community writ large, maybe I didn't fully absorb. In short, you can't feel called out by something that doesn't exist. It became clear that Magdalene Redekop was just the person I needed to hear me, to absolve me. So I wrote her an email, introducing myself, the opera, this project, and my interest in the show. I gather from your work that you might be the perfect person to talk to about the intersection of Mennonites in the performing arts, I wrote. I hope that you might have the time to speak with me about this feeling I've been nursing for the better part of a year, and how you've been examining this intersection. To my surprise, Magdalene, Maggie as she likes to be known, wrote back to me the very next day. Even though she wrote about Silent Light, the movie, in her book, she didn't know that the project had taken on a whole new form in Brooklyn. That said, she made me feel seen from the word go. I know what you mean when you describe that feeling, she says, and immediately I got even more excited to speak with her.
Okay, you know what I realized is that I did not register that your name, Nolan Kehler, is the name of our favorite announcer on Sunday mornings.
This is Maggie. And yes, receiving praise like that makes me feel a lot better about my anxieties. We talk for a long time about our shared experiences. Maggie has infinitely more historical context to present than I do, a knowledge that I wish that I was able to articulate in more detail during my time in New York City. To hear her tell it, it sounds like Maggie knows that I'm not the only person who's been thinking about Mennonite representation in the fine arts. I walk Maggie through everything: how I first got acquainted with the opera, my time in New York City, and everything I've been thinking about since, including the feeling of hesitation and wariness that I have interrogated for these many months.
I do know the feeling, but I'm wary of saying that, even because I think it varies so much. I mean, William Blake said to generalize is to be an idiot, and I mean that's not fair because we all have to generalize. But I was much more curious to hear, at least first, before we assume that your feeling is the same as mine, what you meant when you said you were uneasy. You sound like a deeply thoughtful person. So, I mean, you must have thought about what it was that made you uneasy. Did you have any thoughts of that, or how you were uneasy? Why were you uneasy?
So, I mean, I was, as a fly on the wall in that room, I couldn't help but feel that unease when it came to a story about, I guess, Mennonite dirty laundry. Maybe that's the best way to, like, if we're going to have a conversation about some sort of a transgression within the community, it feels uncomfortable for me. And maybe this isn't even a Mennonite thing. Maybe this is just a non-confrontational sort of a quality that I might have, which might also be influenced by being Mennonite, famously not the most confrontational people. It's a discomfort about confrontation for a start, but the fact that it's a discomfort about a confrontation wrapped in that sort of Mennonite identity kind of ratchets it up. I've taken to describing it as something of like a women talking phenomenon, because even though it's the most important subject I can think of possibly having, there's still a sense of trying to get away from that uncomfortable conversation.
Yeah. And it's wrapped in art, and you are an artist, a performer. So you were there in a double capacity, being almost deliberate thrust into a situation. So you're embedded because you are Mennonite, right? But also because you are an artist and you're listening to an opera. And here you are. I'm not at all surprised that you were uneasy. I think uneasy would be a mild term for how anybody would feel in that situation, because it's coming packaged to you as not just art, but a work of art about another work of art. You see, that's what I was writing my book for, because of this cognitive dissonance that can happen, because it's not you, and yet you're supposed to identify against yourself in a way. And it's a representation.
Maggie's familiarity with Silent Light, the film, came when it was first being shown in the late 2000s with a screening at the Toronto International Film Festival. She also remembers another screening that she saw in another forum.
I was in the audience when Stellet Licht was. We had a performance of it that we listened, a film production of it. Sorry, I start to get excited and then I lose my words. Slow down, Maggie. In a symposium of Mennonite literary critics that happened in University of Pennsylvania, over Pennsylvania State University, I forget which one. And because we were just a small group and we were talking about various things, we all watched that film together, Stellet Licht together. And Robert Zacharias tells me that he remembers that I was laughing at the subtitles because they are so very, very wrong, the English subtitles for the Low German.
Well, at least my friend Sean wasn't alone in laughing at those subtitles.
I'm sure I was laughing, but nervously, because I was so uneasy. And I think that's just, in a way, I think this is just inevitable, and that all the different cultures, that's why I try to put forward this notion of ethnic dialogism, where we are all in a contact zone where some people are part Mennonite, some people are not. Some, that this is if you're an artist, you can't hold yourself up in one corner of it or whatever. You were in a contact zone and you don't like conflict from what you're saying, right?
Right.
Which is not just because you're a Mennonite. I'm sure it's because you're maybe you're like my son who doesn't like conflict either. And there are different kinds of conflicts. William Butler Yeats said, you make out of the conflict with others rhetoric. We make out of the conflict with ourselves poetry. So if you have a conflict within yourself and you're not a poet, like I have poet friends, some who are Mennonite, and I sometimes envy them. I also envy musicians like you who can channel your conflicts into performance and into music. How lucky you are, right?
I was again flattered that Maggie might think of this podcast, my self-conflict, if you like, as poetry. Maybe part of my angst was coming from not being able to perform my conflict aversion in any way while watching others from up in the balcony at National Sawdust. I wondered aloud about her own unease, that unexercisable element that Maggie was dealing with.
Well, it's very different. I don't know. That's a very, very good question. It's also very, very different because of my age, and you and I are, many generations apart. And at the same time, I don't know, you're probably the age of my son. My son is 40. How old are you?
31.
I don't mind. 31. Oh, so my son's older than you. I don't feel distant from what you were describing, though. I feel very much in tune with that. Like I could be there in that auditorium, embedded and watching that and feeling that, right?
Right.
Feeling that discomfort. I mean, there's something peculiarly. Yeah, and I think it's not unique to Mennonites. I think that feeling, could happen to a Black person or to an Indigenous person, or
Sure.
I think it's trying to understand how you feel in your situation like that is something that helps us understand how other people feel in similar situations, because we all want to belong, right? And we all have that need to belong. But with being a Mennonite comes, at least in my experience, a tremendous value on community and on reaching out to other people, right? So then when you are in that situation and all the people doing the performance, they're trying so hard to create something authentic.
That value of community, or in the case of National Sawdust, facsimile of community, was another element that, upon reflection, was driving my discomfort. Opera singers, especially ones at the caliber of Julia, Dan, and Brittany, come together to form intense communities for a period of weeks to prepare production before then jetting off to the next gig, the next community. They have that short of a time frame to learn, piece together, and perform the stories that run the gamut of cultures, communities, and faiths. One thing they obviously don't have much time for is to dive into the generational nuances that Maggie, myself, or, likely, a reader of Canadian Mennonite would be familiar with. This led me to another question about the way that I saw the show versus the way the average Brooklynite would have interacted with it. Maybe, do you think that when we're seeing these portrayals of ourselves in art, do you think that we're inclined to show that same sort of empathy and compassion towards characters, or are we less inclined to show that compassion because we know what that is and what that situation results in when it comes to some sort of moral justice, I guess?
Well, I think it's got to do with, there's so many issues there. One of the issues that it's about is when art gets, in a way, abstract more than representational. And I think when you see something stylized, you have an opportunity. In this case, when you're talking to those viewers who know nothing about Mennonites, but who think they have been given something about Mennonites, because the word Mennonite is there, or they know these are identified as Mennonites. And so that's what it gets back to what you're saying, your problem with a presupposition. The presupposition that is made in that category that is Mennonite, and against that category, and from a viewer's point of view, if you have a group that is represented as the bad guys, in effect, from our small liberal point of view, they are the bad guys. They are the fundamentalists. They are the ones who are rigid. We are not rigid. The rigid people are always some other religion. We are never the ones that are rigid. That's a given, right? Mm-hmm. But then have that leaves you free to have tremendous empathy, because you pity them. You can admit that you might have some conflicts about love, and you might have a problem with if you had an affair, but you didn't have that, right? Oh, lucky me, that I didn't there, but for the grace of God, go you, right? So it allows you to release these feelings and to do virtue signaling and release them and say, this is my empathy. I feel so sorry for those people.
While I don't think for a minute that the cast or crew of Silent Light thought that they were, pardon the expression, holier than those Mennonites, there is something to the idea of empathy that Maggie was explaining. Any actor worth their salt, aka anyone in the representation business, has to be able to empathize with their character in order to make it believable, from Pollyanna to Hannibal Lecter to, well, Johann. The same holds true for the audience. A balance of not being too much like them on stage means more engagement, but it's that attachment to the universal, the things that can span communities, that keep us hooked. This means that the audience is maybe better set up for empathy than I, the card-carrying Mennonite with all of the presuppositions and hang-ups, am.
But in a way, a presupposition is like a literal fundamentalist position, which everything else takes place, right? If you imagine what would Mennonites do, I come back to what I started out by saying when you first asked your first questions, that every person will have a different perspective, because Mennonites are so just like human beings. You'd like to have more breadth, but these days we are all taught to flatten things out, right? Mm-hmm. But it's a question. It's an excellent question. I don't mean it's not a good question. It's just that it has no one answer.
It seems as though there needs to be a place to explore representation, ways to find meaning through art, stylized, abstract, and everything in between. As it happens, Maggie has the term for that place. The word Spielraum literally means play space, a chance for creative people to engage with tricky ideas without the added weight of having to solve the problems of the communities that they are speaking about. It holds space for difficult conversations and a chance for people to talk about their feelings and impressions, the bigger things, without being held down by cultural expectations or norms. Maggie describes it this way.
I like the notion, because to think of the contact zone, which is where different cultures meet, is the place where we all live all the time. I like to think of it as a Spielraum, a place of potential play, because putting things into play has the potential for transformation and growth, and for things not settling into a monolith, right? If you have play with certain values, one of them being respect for difference, another being honesty, and if you are playing in a contact zone, there is there will be constant dialogue to it. It's kind of like hospitality, in which they can enter and play, and hopefully be transformed. Hopefully, be invited to be in that place of a poetic space where everything is alive. Fundamentalism is dead. It's dead space, right?
Those words about fundamentalism brought up another idea in my brain that I hadn't considered before. What if part of my discomfort was some sort of incongruity? A mixture of oil and water between stereotypical Mennonites and the explorative process in the Spielraum. To put it simply, and again, stereotypically, there isn't a lot of space held in the pragmatic Mennonite world for frivolous artistic explorations. There's no time. The crops have got to be harvested, the church has to be served, the children have to be raised. The arts stretch to the quilt, stitched with love by the church ladies, beautiful to be sure, but very much with a purpose. The music, as it is sung, is stunning in its 4-part trademark, but it's not a vain pursuit. It's worship. I wondered aloud if Spielraum was a hospitality that some ingrained part of Mennonites couldn't understand. In other words, do we, as a large tent community, have less patience for the poetic or metaphorical when it comes to acknowledging the faults in our culture?
Yeah, I think you're right. We do. Yeah, I think that I would say we do. That Mennonites prefer, because of our history, because of the Anabaptist resistance to art, and the necessity to speak plain truth and nothing else, which is a basis of literalism in a way, right? And that goes very, very deep. Yes. May I point out what is conspicuous by its absence in our discussion of that production of Silent Light. You tell me that it is an opera, but you have not talked about the music at all. You played some for me, but you have not talked about the music. And that is obviously because music is not language, is a non-linguistic representation, but it is still a representation. So how does the music of this particular Silent Light that you're talking about change everything, all the questions that we have been asking, or that you have been asking, I've also been asking you questions. How does it change them? And I would suggest to you that it changes them all drastically.
Maggie was right. I couldn't believe that I hadn't talked about the music of the show at all with her. I tried to think of a moment that I could share that she might enjoy, and I landed on my very favorite moment in the opera. It was very literal, except for the moment I was just about to tell you about. The moment that stood out to me the most was that, the chorus of this opera was the choir at Trinity Wall Street Church.
Yeah.
And Paula had dug up this hymn. I actually wasn't familiar with it, and then I did some more research, but it appeared in a late 19th century psalter. The City of Light was the moment in the show where the music, to me, felt the most recognizable. It was also the moment when things felt the most still. It was also not a moment sung by Dan, Julia, Brittany, or any of the show's leads. It was sung by the choir, the opera's chorus from Trinity Wall Street Church, that shared a hymn. For Paula, the opera's composer, this element, nearly ubiquitous in Mennonite circles, was essential to preserve in the show.
Like, it still stays in kind of, chordal structure, but it takes it harmonically into a dissonance, which I think is really interesting. So that was really important to me. And in general, the choir plays a very important role throughout the entire piece because they play the community. Once I started to understand kind of what I was going for, I realized that I had written much more kind of operatic roles, and so we ended up going with opera singers in the lead. But the scenes where they're all together feel like they paint the picture more than convey it through music. Like the picture is that it's a united community. This is something.
Of course, what would a hymn be without a song leader? For Silent Light, that meant the show's conductor, Christopher, emerged from the orchestral area of National Sawdust's stage, fake Gesangbuch in hand, that Bible that Paula forgot to bring on that one day of rehearsal, and led the ensemble as though it were a worship service that an audience just happened to also be present at.
And it's such beautiful music. It's also very challenging music. And it seems like it's music you might sing out of a hymnal, perhaps music that's like from Bach. However, the harmonies are very complex. The rhythm keeps changing. Sometimes the sopranos splinter off and go into the stratosphere for a moment. So it's actually very challenging music in a way that we could probably just sing Bach, without a conductor. But this music, with Paula's music, not at all. It needs a conductor. And it benefits from having a leader in that way. So no one could see me. And I'm over in the corner. And so, our solution was like, well, what if I moved during this scene? And then as it turned out, the place for me to move was on stage. And I'm bald and I have kind of a priestly haircut. So conductors, we wear black to conduct usually, unless it's very, very fancy, we wear a tuxedo. But I'm just wearing all black. So suddenly me becoming some kind of priest or something, some kind of pastor, that role perhaps.
The City of Light was originally published in hymnals in the mid to late 1800s, around the time when Mennonites were establishing themselves in North America. I had never heard it in its more traditional form, and frankly, after hearing Paula's version, I didn't want to hear the original. It was as though I was looking at a hymnal through a kaleidoscope that Paula had made, a representation of Mennonite culture that I would be hard-pressed to imagine any Mennonite composer writing. This moment in particular was one that allowed me to suspend my disbelief, my apprehension, my guilt, and just be grateful to have seen this show and the way in which it portrayed the large umbrella of Mennonite culture. It was an experience that Maggie related to as well, the first time she saw the film adaptation of Women Talking.
You want to make believe, right? You want to make believe. And I did. You do and you don't. You believe and you do not believe. If you're watching Stellet Licht and you actually are a Mennonite from that area, I think it's really important to respect the differences in the audience, right? And when I was writing Making Believe, that's what I was trying to do. I was trying to respect the differences in my audience, that they would say, okay, you hear this kind of Mennonite accent or see it in certain arts. I don't see it at all. And I would say, that's okay. Yeah.
Okay.
I get that. But more important than that to me is the respect, for particularity and for honest. I would say that my word better than authenticity, I would say honesty is more important.
Silent Light, the opera, isn't accurate. Everyone who worked on the project told me so. But there's a difference between accurate and honest. A sincere representation of something through the lens of the Mennonite culture. It is the honesty that we respond to, even though we often think we need accuracy instead. As I looked at the stars on that wedding night for my friends in Morden, I thought not about how well the opera had portrayed my community, but about the beauty of the music, the sounds of the City of Light in the stars that resonated hundreds of kilometers away in Brooklyn, all the way back to my community in the Pembina Valley. I was about to see just how far that honesty would go as Silent Light opened its doors to audiences for opening night.